In a banking scenario, or in an IT or technology scenario, or in a kind of brokerage scenario, what do you think is the gap between where we are now and what is required for modernization in terms of infrastructure, in terms of...
That's a great question. Thank you. Let's explore that question, because I think there's multiple areas of gaps, if you will. One area that doesn't probably get spoken about enough, because I think some contact centers are not going to talk about it, but the fact is that the typical global contact center organizations' relationships are often with folks from the customer experience side, vendor management, things like that, related to BPO or supply chain. There's very little relationships those people have with the IT, the CIO world. So there's a real significant gap that those contact center companies have to overcome. We've seen a huge spike in the global contact centers beginning to try to morph their identities into more digital services. And adding different components and things like that. But I think there's still a significant gap that has to be overcome in regard to that. The other gap that comes to mind is the way in which these organizations position themselves for workforce development, workforce management. I give Jamaica a lot of credit, because it seems like this particular population of people, this society, is quite well engaged with understanding what BPO is, which is a good sign. But even what they may have thought BPO was 2 or 3 years ago is really not what it's becoming. So somebody earlier, I think it was Gloria, or somebody talked about the constant evolution of this market. And I think those gaps continue to develop as these markets emerge.
Sure. I think within the banking space, one of the things we've seen is that as you deal with older institutions, there are ingrained processes that could develop even for companies that have multiple locations in multiple countries. And as you seek to take advantages of what BPO or shared services can provide, it's important to look to see how you can standardize those processes to really bring them, to streamline them so you can take advantage of these opportunities. One recent example that we did is that we had an exercise last year where we looked at our mortgage process across the entire Caribbean. And when we looked at how we originated mortgages, it was extremely complicated. And it would have been difficult for anyone to draw the actual process flow for mortgage origination, despite a mortgage being a relatively simple product. Through that, we were able to streamline that in a relatively tight process, which now allows us to have centers of excellence in terms of processing mortgages. So you could go into a particular country, ask for a mortgage, and that process is now standardized, so it can be sent to someone who is an expert on processing mortgages. So I think that gap is important in companies to identify that there's work that needs to be done internally before you can take advantage of some of these opportunities.
I think what we're doing with analytics now, we're really at our infancy. I think that's what's going to drive a lot of the changes as we go forward. With access to greater information, we will bridge that historical divide between the technology folks and the service delivery folks. And I think that's a big change that I'm seeing coming down the pipeline. That will drive to greater efficiencies. And like Jim said, AI will not replace the people. It will just give us better tools so that we know what our customers are asking for. I mean, after all, we are truly in a global market now. The removal of those boundaries is what's driving a greater sense of excellence.
And I know that people will not get replaced. They'll do different kind of work. What is it here in the workforce in Jamaica that makes them ready for this transformation, this modernization? Like, what are the characteristics in the workforce? I forget the name of the gentleman in the brown suit. David. You mentioned, you have the same culture, watch the same TV shows and things like that. I happen to believe that as processes modernize, what people will do will become a little bit more complex. So they'll have better tools, but also the impact that they have or what they bring to the table will be they're resolving a little bit more complex situations or providing more complex solutions. So what do you think in the workforce has the characteristics to position this workforce better?
So I can take a quick shot at it. I can tell you right now, we love Jamaica. Here's why. If you've never heard of servant leadership is really what's happening in the culture today in the contact center business. It's about people wanting to serve. I live in America. I've lived in India for over 3 years, and I've stayed out here several times. Americans don't understand servant lead culture, in my opinion, as much as it does here. Because everybody I speak to in Jamaica and all these other places I travel to, they're so happy to help. It's really not like that in America if you actually shop in America, in Jim's personal opinion. So I think the training that we provide to make them a super agent is gonna be easy to administer over here because the culture of a Jamaican person is to serve. And at the end of the day, customer experience is about serving others, not serving yourself. That's Jim's opinion. David?
I think the industry started in Montego Bay for a very specific reason. We were able to draw from some of the seasonality of the hospitality industry. And that has somewhat transcended all the way through. So now we're a truly island-wide BPO business. We continue to draw on to Jim's point. We are a nation that likes to serve. We've always been a very open society. We welcome visitors, always have, always will. The BPO space is just another way of welcoming visitors to Jamaica, just via the phone or via the web. It's the same thing continuing. And as we layer on the technology, we'll just have to get better at it.
Awesome. Perrin?
Sure. I think that we have a very adaptable culture. And what we've seen internally is that as we develop new processes or different types of ways to do things, someone who's never done that job before comes in, learns quickly, and is able to adapt to what needs to be done very fast. I think we have a strong educational system here in Jamaica as well, which puts us very close to adapting to new technology. So as things evolve, as things change, the workforce is really able to adapt quickly with that and to continue moving. And I think as we look at the growth in the BPO sector, one of the things that we'll see is that things will change over time. The sector will not look the same way in the next 10 years as it is now. The type of work will be different, and the type of work is different than it is today. And we've seen as an organization where we've grown over the last 5 years, where the work that's done within a shared service environment is very different from what was done 10 years ago. And our employees have been able to adapt and to grow with the changing types of roles.
Kirk?
Yeah, great question. I really like that question, Raj. So when I look at that issue, I first start with the fact that I would place Jamaica among its peer countries. We could talk about the Philippines and India, but that's a different sort of comparison. But when you look at its peers, as probably everyone knows, Jamaica is the third largest English-speaking country in the Americas. So that gives it a significant strength for, obviously the big United States country where all the clients are. You also have a stable democracy. So stable democracies produce trust in financial markets. They enable countries to, get things like the IDB loan that's supporting the Marjorie Straw's program, which helps develop talent. And so you have good things happening there. But the other piece that I've observed, which is a bit more, difficult to cite actual data around, but I've seen it repeatedly. There is something very unique about the familiarity both ways between the Jamaican population and the United States population and vice versa. And why that's so significant is the trust and the ability to sort of interact I think is already in place. I've been to other Caribbean nations where that's not quite how it works. There's a little bit more reticence, a little bit more, I don't know, suspicion's the right word, but I think all of those combined with some of these great remarks my peers here have spoken about, this adaptability and this desire to thrive, I don't think it's just a slogan. I think it's a real issue here. We continue to see it.